Okay, again, welcome. Happy that all of you are joining this webinar about fictional inflation. I shared my screen, and we're gonna tell you all about fictional inflation for the next 45 minutes. But let me first start to introduce Jimmy Anklesaria. Extremely happy that Jimmy is joining this webinar because of his long career, really impressive career. So he has been professor at the University of San Diego, teaching cost management since the early 80s. He's the owner of the Anklesaria group, and Jimmy knows all about cost management. He's one of the gurus in the world, used to write a lot of books, originally from India, but I think more than half of his life he spent in the US now. And Jimmy has worked with the most impressive companies all over the world. Here you find some logos. His network is enormous, and he has been teaching and coaching people within those companies about cost management, making should cost models and cost price breakdowns, and all his expertise he will share with you today. So after telling a bit more about the background of fictional inflation, I will start interviewing Jimmy. You just need to wait a couple of minutes for that. Short introduction about myself. I used to work within procurement more than 20 years as a CPO for 4 different companies. About 6 years ago, I founded the company WTP Dynamics. WTP stands for What's the Price? And I'm also a part-time trainer for NEFI, the Dutch Procurement Association. I'm originally from the Netherlands, so not a native speaker, but Jimmy will help me. So the agenda, 45 minutes. The session will be recorded. A lot of people told us we can't be joining the webinar, but please record it for us so you can share the information afterwards. So I will tell you a bit more about fictional inflation, then start with the interview with Jimmy. And of course, at the end, we will give you some takeaways. If you have any questions, it's not possible to unmute you. Sorry for that, but please use the chat function to share your thoughts. And if we have any time left, we can take a look at the questions. If not, we gonna answer it later after the webinar, because the time is limited, as you probably can understand. So, fictional inflation. First of all, I want to share a small piece of history with you. When we look at procurement in the early 90s, it was all about sourcing and availability. So the name buyer was not used very often. People were focusing on receiving goods and filling the stock, all looking at continuation within the supply chain. That was the main task of people working within procurement. Then after the 90s, we all started to negotiate. We found out that you can earn a lot of money, you can reduce your spend when you start with professional negotiations, so focusing on cost savings, centralization. So what would happen, dear supplier, if we combine 3 companies and you will receive 1 order? If we reduce the 5 suppliers within our category to 3 only, would you be willing to offer us a better price? And the first company started using cost models, and a lot of them used the help of Jimmy, of course, how to do this. Then after 2010, something else happened within procurement. Buyers became very powerful, and a lot of their colleagues asked them to not only focus on cost savings, but to train themselves within supply chain and to look at quality, at sustainability. And of course, after the financial crisis in 2008, they all started to focus on risk management, because you need to do business with healthy suppliers, of course. also part of the responsibility of buyers. So their job changed a bit, not only focusing on negotiation and cost management anymore, but on a lot of other stuff within total cost of ownership. Then after 2015, we saw something else happening within the jobs within procurement. Suddenly, digitalization came up on two sides, looking at processes, so source to pay. For example, a lot of companies started to organize that in a much more efficient way as they used to do it. And the other thing, basing the choices you were making within your procurement job much more on figures and on facts and on analytics. So this was also a very clear development within the profession of procurement. And then when something crazy happens within the market, like a COVID-19 crisis, then something special is going to happen. We all go back to basics. So we forget what we have been doing over the last 10 or 20 years. And it's all about the basics within procurement, availability and pricing. And this determines the agenda of almost each buyers, not only today, but of course also over the last, let's say, 3 years already. And let us focus a bit more on those basic items. Availability. What I hear a lot when I talk with our clients and with the professional procurement people, they say, what's now going on in the market is so extreme, don't blame me. I was not able to prepare myself for this. But is this really true? We talk about COVID-19 and the real damage started in Q1 2020. But this is no coincidence. And let me show you, and some of the people who are joining this webinar probably saw this sheet already in other meetings. But we have this foot and mouth disease in 21. Then SARS, the avian flu, financial crisis, of course, volcano eruption in Iceland. We were not able to fly anymore in Northern Europe. Fukushima, 2011. Ebola, West Africa. Then the Brexit, of course, horrible for a lot of companies and businesses. The trade war between the US and China. 2018, we almost forgot. It's only 4 years ago. And then after COVID, we still go on with crises and things are going on in the world. The Suez Channel, where the boat blocked about 25% of all the transportation routes over sea. Ukraine, the war in the news, of course, every day. And also next year, there will be another crisis, something with Russia, monkeypox, floods, something will happen. So don't tell your boss you are not responsible for the availability of goods. This is the proof that it is on your desk and you need to take responsibility. So especially after seeing this list, be prepared for the next disaster. And when you are still using single source in the Far East, you take an enormous risk. So focus on dual sourcing or other strategy, but try to reduce your risks. And then let's focus on prices. That's what we want to focus on during this webinar. So let me tell you what exactly happened with commodity prices before COVID-19 and today. And what we did, we analyzed over 2,500 commodities and their pricing history, and we came up with a pretty nice conclusion. So when you don't separate these commodities and we just look at all the prices, then this is what we see. So index 100, the stable quarter at the end of 2019. And then, of course, early 2020, COVID started. But in first case, the first half year, prices were not going up. They were actually going down. So the lowest level over the last 2.5 years was Q3 2020. Prices were really low at that time. And then, of course, almost all the prices, all the categories, all the commodities went up. And this is what we all noticed, even up to index 160. The good news is that the peak was in Q2. And after Q2, the last 3-4 months, most commodities went down. So this is the good news. And this is, of course, where buyers need to act. In case you have been accepting a price increase, I hoped you made it temporary, but now you need to focus on the price decreases and start chatting with your suppliers again. And let me show you a bit more details about categories. So what we found out is that 65% of all the important commodity categories, and we specifically focused on foods because we know within this webinar most of the people are working in the non-food business. So we have been focusing on non-food. This is what we came up with. The 65%, the lowest level was in this Q3 2020. They all show the same development. And in all those cases, so look at stainless steel, scrap metals, but also wood, synthetic fibers, extremely important categories, all the same rhythm, the same development. The peak took place in Q2 and now prices are going down. But of course, there are some exceptions. And let me also show you these exceptions. These 5 specific category groups within commodities show something else. The peak is going on right now, today. And of course, you directly see there is a lot of energy used within these industries. So because of that, that's a very direct explanation of the peak, which is still going on in Q3. And then to finish off, there are 2 categories where the peak took place last year. So when you are buying something made out of hardwood, of animal fibers, like wool, prices have been going down a lot after, in both cases, Q3 2021. So it's good to know. And of course, you should look at all the details. This is, of course, data we have available, but I just wanted to show you at a pretty high level what's going on in the market. And then let me tell you something about fictional inflation. It's not very well known. You can't read anything in the newspapers about this name, so I need to explain a bit more. I prepared 3 simple examples in order to explain you what's going on in the market and why fictional inflation is extremely important for each buyer to realize. First of all, energy. There are probably some people in this webinar who at home are still paying a low price for energy because they have a background in procurement and they came up with the idea to hedge. So to ask for fixed prices 1 or 2 years ago, and a lot of people are still paying a low price at home for their energy. And then let me ask you this question. Would this be the same when you look at professional companies? They have specialists who are focusing on energy contracts. So what I expect is that at least 20-25% of all manufacturers are still paying a low price for energy, but they all sent out a letter about price increases. And of course, they want to gain some additional profit in case of crises. But you need to check what's going on. You need to ask them. The second one, the question I asked to the group who is joining, and you don't need to answer this one, you're probably happy with that. Is there anybody who is significantly going to the toilet to poop more than they used to do before the crisis and now? Did your toilet behavior change a lot? The answer is probably no, but let me show you the figures. This is what's going on with toilet paper. So in the beginning of the crisis, people started to buy lots and lots of toilet paper because they were afraid. People don't like risks. And in a later stage, of course, the demand went down because we had so much toilet paper at home. So when you look at this graph, and you can find all this kind of information within commoditystats.com. So on long term, toilet paper is pretty stable. When we have more people living on the earth, probably it's going up a bit, but it's pretty stable. So the short-term demand, because of a crisis, is going up. And then manufacturers, they add something. They start even producing more because of this increasing demand. And then after a certain period, the demand is going down. But let me show you what's happening in the market. Plus 42% more toilet paper within a couple of months. This is enormous within a stable market. And of course, at the end of that year, nothing to do with the crisis, at the end of 2020, the demand was more than 5% lower because we had so much stock at home. And then let me show you what happened with the prices. Prices went up with 26% because of this peak in the demand. And at the end of the year, when the demand was stable, prices were still 15% higher. And this is what we call fictional inflation, because there are people in the market, people within sales, marketeers, manufacturers, who of course try to keep the price as high as possible. And this is the proof what's going on. So the graph above, you are able to look at the volumes, and the lower graph we show you what's going on with prices. And these are actual volumes and prices paid in the market. And then the dishwasher, the one I like the most. So at home, we have been building this new kitchen. I'm not that handy, so I hired some people to do that. But I told them I used to be a buyer. So the machines in the kitchen, like the dishwasher, this is what I want to buy myself. This will be my procurement process, and I'm going to earn money there. So I found this very energy safe machine from Bosch, and I was willing to pay 1,100 euros for that. Of course, not available today, but can't take long. And then this was week one. And then after a couple of weeks, my family started to complain because we need to do the dish by hand. And I have this daughter start talking about child abuse. You treat me like Cinderella. This is what I never had to do in my life. Please buy a new dishwasher. What's going on? So a lot of pressure. And then I found the same dishwasher for even a better price. And they promised me probably shipment within 4 weeks. So I said, let's order a second one. Then after 12 weeks, you can imagine a lot of pressure at home. I needed to look in my wallet and to pay much more money. And this one would be delivered within 2 weeks. It cost me some extra money, but I needed to have my dishwasher now. So I ordered 3, and I was able to cancel the other 2. And finally, of course, I only needed 1 dishwasher. But Bosch, the manufacturer, he thought there's something crazy going on. This is a very popular machine because there are 3 in back order now, and I need to produce these 3 dishwashers. Let me produce 5 or 6 because this is probably a very positive machine. I will become market leader with this machine, not knowing that it was me who was in some kind of fake way ordering 3 machines, but only needed 1. So Bosch tells to all their suppliers, please provide me with spare parts because there is an enormous demand for this machine. And all these suppliers, they started to buy additional commodities, additional plastics, additional metals in order to produce their spare parts. So the whole supply chain panicked because of my fictional demand. Prices went up. And this is what's going on in the market. And now I'm talking about a private case with the dishwasher. But what would happen within the professional market? Of course, same things are going on. And let me finish by explaining this with a same kind of graph. So a stable market, the long-term demand goes up because of any crisis. People start producing even more than that because they don't want to take a risk, and they are searching for safety. And this is what's going on with the prices. Because of this enormous peak in demand, you will have price increases, just the simple market mechanism. But then there is some guy or woman who tries to keep the price on a high level. And as soon as the prices, the demand is going down and developing in a natural way, prices are still very high. And this is what Jimmy and myself call fictional inflation. And to be honest, it's not an official term. It was Jimmy who came up with this term. But you, as a buyer, you need to realize it's a present for you. Please embrace this term and start using it within your business, because as soon as you will receive a letter like this, and believe me, you will receive them. You probably have a staple on your desk with hundreds of letters like these. Your first reaction should be, yeah, I understand there's something going on in the market, but to be honest, there's also a part fictional inflation involved. And this should be your first argument. Just start using that name, and then the dialogue will start with your supplier and explain them what's going on. Again, a present for you. This should be your best argument starting negotiating on price increases. Okay. Let me look at the time. Yeah, a bit more than 50 minutes. So the rest of the webinar we will fill with the interview. Jimmy, are you still with me?
I'm very much here, Robert.
Okay. So any comment on what I just told the audience?
Well, I think this is first of all something that we're all experiencing, and I may or may not have shared with you, but your examples of the dishwasher is something that I've experienced myself. We've just remodeled our home, and as you can imagine, the lack of appliances in the market, and I have the same problem. Our home is ready without the oven or the dishwasher or whatever. And what I've noticed is that what happens in what I call a private life of a family is magnified maybe a millionfold with companies. So a buyer or procurement specialist whose responsibility it is to keep the manufacturing line going, because as you very well know, Robert, in your experience as a CPO, you can negotiate whatever prices you want. And, the manufacturing floor, the manufacturing manager couldn't give a damn how much you paid as long as you don't stop the assembly line. To him or her, that is far more costly than the 5 cents extra you had to pay.
Of course.
So when you talk about, the actual business of producing and selling a product, the more important thing is keep the line going at any cost. I mean, that's their opinion right now. In the procurement world, you probably disagree with it. But I do feel that industry today is a magnification of what the private individual is experiencing. So you're bang on that concept of fictional inflation. It's back to the old-fashioned, what is price? Price is the equilibrium between demand and supply. So when the demand becomes fictional and goes up and outstrips the current supply on paper, well, the suppliers believe that it's the best opportunity to raise price, and that is their, their business strategy. So I couldn't agree with you more, Robert.
Great, thanks for that feedback. And a second question, Jimmy. You have a lot of experience. You saw a lot of companies from the inside. You have been talking to several CPOs and their teams. Do do you believe that most buyers understand how cost management could work, or do they still focus on the traditional way using their market power?
Well, I think it depends, Robert, because there are, obviously some very, very sophisticated buyers, and I have the privilege and honor to work with them. But then there's also, I would say, unfortunately, the bulk of them uh, are falling victim to this, you know, fictional trap called inflation. And
Hmm.
what really troubles me, Robert, is the number of companies, the number of buyers within those companies who relate inflation to the worst possible index, the
Hmm.
consumer price index. So when you read and you're blasted all around with media, inflation, 8.5%, 9%, sometimes double digit. The first reaction is, oh, but my supplier asked me for 7% price increase, so that's less than inflation. And I mean, sometimes you really have to roll your eyes. What are you doing? And how can any company put their confidence in you as a buyer and put millions of dollars or euros into your hands to manage when you are so short-sighted in terms of
Hmm.
thinking that inflation is the consumer price index? And to me, I've actually had suppliers tell me, Jimmy, CPI is my best friend.
Hmm. And please tell the listeners, how should you react? Not following the consumer index, but what should you do? What would be the best way to react?
Yeah, I mean, see, that's why I'm always a believer in process. Follow a process, follow a methodology. Whether you use my zero-based pricing concept or whatever other tool is out there in the world. Try to understand that price, Price, is a five-letter word. Price, that's five letters. And
Hmm.
within the price of any product or service, there are five elements. Direct material being one of them. Direct labor, manufacturing overhead, general selling administrative, and profit. And within the direct material, there would be material number 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to material N, which could be any number. And
Hmm.
each of these are not correlated. So if the price of steel or wood or whatever that is in short supply in a certain segment or in a certain time frame, if that goes up by 40 to 50%, you can't have a supplier walk in and say, well, as you very well know, that we are making this product out of this metal or that wood or that plastic, and as the price has gone up 40%, that you should pay 40% more, because the point is that material may be 60% of the total, and this wood or plastic may be 50 or 60% of 60%, which is 30 to 40%. So
Hmm.
you can't start using generic sort of tracking mechanisms. You've got to look at what makes up or what the components of that PRICE is. And within that, what are the individual components? What are the individual raw materials? And then find a suitable tracking mechanism. And one last thing, Robert, when we talk about tracking, you should always remember one very valuable point, if your listeners can take this back with them.
Hmm.
When you look at an index, not CPI, okay, throw that out of the window right now. But even if you look at a metals index, and within the metals, a particular type of stainless steel or whatever, very specific index, don't feel very happy that, oh, yes, I followed the advice and I didn't look at CPI, I looked at the specific index. Keep in mind, everybody, an index by definition is an average. It's an average, which means if you can visualize a bell-shaped curve, there are standard deviations on either side of the mean, which means that there are some companies within that same industry for the exact same, you know, product, or, in this case, a commodity. Some are paying below the average, some are paying above the average. So
Hmm.
what is more important than, so first of all, throw away the CPI, focus on specific indices, find out what part of the total price this particular commodity represents, and then finally, even more sophisticated, recognize that a good supplier should be getting a better deal than the average in the industry,
Hmm.
unless you are dealing with a well below average supplier. So I think these are the type of tools that a good buyer or analyst should be looking at.
great answer. I think very helpful and pragmatic also. Can you indicate what results are achieved when you work in that way?
I'm sorry, Robert, I missed your question.
So, do you have some examples of the results achieved when working in this way you just described, comparing
Oh,
to?
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I look at certain cases in the case of aluminum, on
Hmm.
in an certain extrusion part. One of my very valued and long-term clients for over 30 years was in a negotiation with a supplier of extruded parts. And aluminum at this point of time had gone up significantly, like about 30 to 35%.
Hmm.
And that was just one portion of the total. It was a very, very sophisticated, machine driven, where the serious amount of cost was more the depreciation of very sophisticated equipment and robotics. So what I had to show through an example, an actual calculation here was, yes, aluminum had gone up 30%, which number one, I discount a little bit to say maybe 25% because we are better than the average. That's number
Hmm.
one.
Hmm.
Secondly, aluminum represented about 20 to 25%. So let's say 20% has gone up 25%. If you get my drift, that's only 5% on the total. And since we're talking, we got into the supplier to say, okay, in the meantime, while aluminum had gone up, here are some other commodities within the same mix when we did the assembly. Here are some other parts that have gone down. Labor has gone down because of the better productivity. Volumes have gone up like crazy. So your fixed cost, which was a significant part when you added the fixed cost of not only the equipment, but also the fact that your general selling administrative is 90% fixed. The CEO's salary didn't go up by 30% or something like that. And when we did the whole calculation in what I call price discipline, we ended up with a 4% price reduction. But that's because it was all based on fact, on logic. We showed to the supplier there's nothing serious, sort of sinister or mean in my negotiation. It is
Hmm.
what I call the company has, and in fact, the founder of the company had told me once, go ahead and tell my people around the world, Jimmy, that our job is to be extremely tough but wonderfully fair. And the supplier actually
Hmm.
recognized that the customer was wonderfully fair but extremely tough. So that's a classic example. And I think more and more people around the world now are beginning to realize that a fact-based negotiation will take care of this. But to do that, you have to be educated in this fact-based negotiation.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Another question. Of course, a lot of buyers today have to deal with scarcity, and then it's
Mhm.
it's harder to negotiate because a lot of the power is on the side of the seller, of course. Any advices for those buyers who struggle with that?
Absolutely, Robert. That's back to my, extremely tough, wonderfully fair. Because at the end of the day, it's relationships that make the difference. And it's
Hmm.
very difficult to have a relationship if you are being one-sided, beating up on the supplier, not at all collaborative, and in fact, I call it confrontational, which is a traditional buyer.
Hmm.
Yes, of course, when the time comes when the supplier has an opportunity, of course they're going to take it. Why wouldn't they? There was a time when reverse auctions used to be like the fad of the day. Everybody was running into reverse auctions
Yeah.
until a very innovative major supplier in the electronics distribution world turned around when there was a shortage of parts. Those who were collaborative, working in partnership, they got 100% of their volume, whatever they required. And
Hmm.
those who had dragged this supplier through the reverse auctions had to go into an auction the opposite way. So they were not given their parts, and they had to literally fight to get the parts by pushing the price at some cases up to 600% above market because there was just very limited availability. So the good old saying, or what goes around comes around. I've always believed relationships matter. At the end of the day, Robert, you and I have experienced this ourselves. It's one phone call from someone whom you trust,
Yeah.
someone whom you respect, and someone whom you've collaborated and is there watching your back and you're watching their back. So when they're in short supply, they get 100% of their requirement, and the guys who have dragged you through the mud get zero. And I can tell you in person, I have practiced that myself. I'm not going to deny it, Robert, because there are times when I'm only one person and I can only be at one place at a time. And I have basically said no to certain major big customers who kick me around versus a small customer who treats me with the respect that is then reciprocated, and I give them my limited time. I mean, not that it's a big deal, but it's an analogy that I hope people will take away.
Yeah, yeah. So relationships, not only tough negotiations, always a combination of those two.
Absolutely.
We have been talking about fictional inflation and prices and availability. Are there other developments you recognize within the supply chain? So when we look at the real trends going on today.
Yeah, I think, in fact, this is something that I was asked on a talk show some time ago, where, what is happening in the market? What is changing? What are some of the new developments? And my response was, I see a trend, and it's a very, very good trend. I've talked about it for 20 plus years. And the trend is now, I wouldn't say moving away from leveraging volume, because leveraging volume, you started your talk today about, the importance of narrowing the supply base, increasing volume and getting price reductions for it. Leveraging volume has always been there, but I believe, in my experience, leveraging volume with the big companies probably gives them somewhere between 6 and 8%, I'd say, competitive advantage. But what I've seen happening, and I've been a strong promoter, in fact, thank you for showing a couple of my books. The second book, Managing the Cost of the Supply Chain, is based on leveraging ideas. And I think that's where really breakthrough is coming, because if there was something that cost, let's say, was in the market at $100, where the average company paid $100, the company with leverage could possibly get the same product for about $90 to $92. But the smaller company that pays $100, working collaboratively with the supplier and the stakeholders and the customers, may find breakthrough ideas that can, and I've seen it happen, I've participated in this, the $100 becomes $60. There is no way the big guy thumping the table with volume can get the price down from 100 to 60. So I think the future is about leveraging ideas.
And if I remember it well, this is what you call aim and drive.
That is correct. That's the process that delivers this type of way of thinking, and most importantly, codifies it in a way that artificial intelligence now can help the smaller and mid-sized companies actually get a more competitive advantage than even the big guys who still thump the table and are not willing to work collaboratively with the supplier and what I call harness the inherent knowledge of the extended enterprise. You have got to understand and believe that the supply chain is full of brilliant people. And when a buyer or a customer company recognizes that there is inherent knowledge and taps that knowledge, then I'd say you're taking the full advantage of the supply chain.
Okay, great. Thank you for all those lessons. Let me quickly check if there are any questions in the chat. Yeah, here's one. The question is, what is your opinion on the demand for electronic components and chips? Is this inflated or is this real? And I know you have an opinion about that, Jimmy.
Yeah, I think that goes back to your dishwasher, because especially advanced semiconductors, the typical memory type semiconductors is not having a problem. It's the advanced ones, the ones that are used in autonomous vehicles, in your mobile phones, etc. That clearly has gone through the syndrome that you described, where buyers of whether it is the buyers of the semiconductors going into your your automobiles or your mobile phones, or the IoT devices in the world, they did exactly what we said earlier. They were double dipping and triple dipping. So that was one problem. As you very well know, on the supply side, semiconductors is not something that you can turn on and turn off, because a wafer fab costs billions and billions of dollars. And I think that is another situation. The risk of no supply has made buyers inflate their demand. And that unfortunately has translated into a shortage. The second and sad thing is here, there is a part of the supply chain that unfortunately has stripped itself. And I'm talking specifically in my region. We've got many tens and hundreds of ships stranded on the in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Long Beach. And that was a natural supply chain issue that tripped itself because one, we ran out of containers, so there was nothing to send back to places like China and Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. So we were not sending back containers because they were not unloaded. That was one. Secondly, we had a huge issue that even once President Biden was able to get the dock workers to start unloading, there were no trucks and trailers to take it off. And that is a very political issue. And I think buyers of the world need to start focusing on global policy, which affects the supply chain. It's not just about supplier, manufacturing, shipping. It is global policy. And sometimes policy makes it so difficult that in this particular case I'm talking about, unfortunately, the leadership of the in California found it some crazy idea that the only way they would allow trucks to come in and take the material off the docks was if 80% of the trucks were electric. And the truckers said, to hell with you. You know, we don't have 80% of the trucks, so we can't stage our trucks. They didn't get permission to stage, and it's too expensive to be sending something from another state just to Long Beach to pick it up. So we created our own bottleneck, but I think that is easing off, Robert, and the road ahead looks like we're going to stabilize.
Okay, great. Looking at the time, we need to finish this session, so we have 1 minute left, and I would like to share the fact that if you have more questions, or tomorrow or the day after, don't hesitate to contact us. Just write an email. I'm also able to contact Jimmy afterwards in order to find the answers for that. Again, thanks a lot for joining this webinar, especially for you, Jimmy. It was an honor to listen to you. You can clarify difficult stuff in a really easy way that everybody understands. So, Jimmy, especially for you, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Robert, and I hope this was valuable to your listeners.
Okay, I hope the same. Thank you all. Take care. Bye.